My name's Justin Grealy. I'm a sound engineer from many years standing, and the thing I'm going to talk to you today about is doing monitors from front of house. We're here in the Pickle Factory in Bethnal Green, which is a small room with a small stage and what I would consider to be a regular in-house monitor system. That is to say, there are 4 mixes. There's a pair of wedges for the singer, 2 single mixes for the musicians, and another single wedge and a sub for the drummer. And that is not to say that I'm excluding the drummer from the group of musicians, but people often do. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we do monitors from front of house and some of the tricks, tips and pitfalls that you will find as a result of doing this. I have a digital desk here today, but before I talk about that, I'm just going to talk for a minute about analogue desks. You will rarely meet analogue desks these days. They have tend to mostly be retired from the music industry, except for really large format concerts. But you will find the occasional one, particularly in small old house gigs. Now the problem with doing monitors from front of house is that if you only have one set of inputs, then each input channel needs to do 2 different things, because the monitoring is a separate job from mixing front of house, very often has different criteria. So as a monitor, as a sound engineer, we are required to do 2 jobs at once. Unfortunately, we don't get paid for doing 2 jobs at once, but nevertheless, that's what we have to do. So in the case of an analogue mixing desk, you will have to use the same mic amp, the same gain and the same EQ for both monitors and front of house, because the monitor sends are derived from auxiliary sends off of each channel on the desk. Now, it is possible to mitigate this difficult circumstance in some ways by, for example, using Y-splits. If you Y-split a vocal, for example, into 2 channels of an analogue desk, you will find that you can use one of the channels exclusively for front of house, only use the post-fader auxiliary sends for effects, and you can use the other channel, which has an entirely separate mic amp and EQ, obviously, for monitors. This means that you can make changes to the front of house channel without affecting the sound on stage. This is the big difficulty with doing monitors from front of house. Once you have done your sound check and you are committed to the gain structure and the EQ structure that you have, you cannot really make any changes to this during the show without affecting the sound on stage. This is particularly true of gain adjustments. Now, as the sound, particularly in small rooms, but generally invariably changes between sound check and show, there will be the requirement to make some changes both in the EQ of the PA system and in the EQ and the levels of the monitor mixes. And if you only have shared mic amps and shared EQs, this can become an issue. So in the case of an analogue console, I would Y-split at least my vocal channels, and I do this physically with a Y-split cable. This of course can cause you problems in terms of it increases the number of input channels you require, and so it's not really possible to do it for a whole band. For a band with maybe 16 inputs, you would obviously need a 32 power desk and 16 Y-splits, which is a lot of work, as well as being pretty much undoable, certainly in terms of changeovers, all of that kind of thing. But as a basic minimum, you really should Y-split your vocals to give you some versatility. An analogue mixing desk will usually have some pre-fader auxiliary sends, usually 4 or 6, which are dedicated to the monitors. This means that the fader movements that you make when you're mixing the front of house don't affect the monitor levels. And there should also be, somewhere between the output of the desk and the actual monitor speaker itself, some means of equalising the mix. Traditionally, this would be a 31 band graphic equaliser, ideally inserted on the insert point of the auxiliary output, but more often than not they're run in line. Generally speaking, with house systems you get what you're given, and so today really I'm just going to be talking about making the best of it all. We're very fortunate today here in the Pickle Factory because we have got a lovely Midas digital desk. We have a Pro 2C here, which is a smashing console. One of the big advantages that digital desks have over analog desks is that we can soft patch a whole bunch more inputs, so I can in fact duplicate my entire band input on another set of inputs which are almost completely independent. The only thing that they share is the gain, because actually each microphone is plugged into the stage box at one point, so even if I split that point into two channels, there is only one gain control. But most monitor consoles, and this one is no exception, give you the facility to trim digitally any inputs that are that you are not controllable by the master gain. So if I've split, for example, the lead vocal mic into two different channels on the desk, I use the gain to set up the channel that does front of house, and then I use the digital trim to change the input level if I need to do that in order to make it more usable for the monitor system. This is really a big advantage. It's one of the great gifts that digital consoles give us, and this is exactly what I have done today. I've also patched some graphic EQs, and I've allocated 4 auxiliary sends for my 4 mixes. Traditionally, monitor-wise, I would lay the mixes out as seen from front of house in the same way as we lay microphones out. So that is to say that the stage right single wedge mix, house left, of course, would be mix 1. The centre pair would be mix 2. The stage left single will be mix 3. And in this particular case, I have done what I prefer to do with the drum fill, which consists of a wedge and a sub, and I've put them on 2 separate mixes. The reason that I do this is that most often any feedback that is going to be caused by the drum monitor is likely to be caused by the low frequency aspects of what's going on, especially by the bass drum, and particularly if the drummer favours having a loud bass drum in his monitor. So it is possible to deal with feedback issues quite severely without actually taking away without affecting the drummer's whole mix, in that you can EQ and change the level of the sub relative to the wedge. So even if he loses the sub, he's still got something to go on. And it is quite a frequent problem because of the proximity of these fairly high-powered, low-frequency enclosures to the drum kit itself. It can be a real challenge to get any decent amount of drum level in a drum wedge without there being the potential for feedback. There are several other issues that it is very important to consider when thinking about doing monitors from front of house, and particularly this relates to using noise gates, compressors, any other kind of signal processing, because obviously the channels being shared between the monitors and the front of house, any compression that you apply, for example, to a keyboard player, will be audible in the monitors as well as in the front of house. And obviously the criteria are 2 quite different things. If you compress, and particularly if you over-compress an instrument, and something like a piano is a very good example of this, of a dynamically sensitive instrument, the more you compress it, the more you affect the way that the musician actually plays the instrument. Because particularly with the piano, if you're squashing the dynamic range, if you're reducing the dynamic range, what it does is it makes the musician strike the keys harder in order to get the same kind of dynamic effect. So effectively, it's really easy to make people overplay. I tend to try and avoid using gates and compressors wherever possible in this situation, and in fact my ideal situation would be none at all. If you are in a situation where you have to do monitors from front of house with shared channels. If you split your channels, again, you have then the choice, the option, to be able to use dynamics processing on the channels that are dedicated to the front of house and not in the monitor channels. As I say, in this situation, we have the potential to wire split everything. So essentially, what I'm going to do is two completely separate mixes here, one for the band on stage and one for the front of house PA. Different faders. The only thing that any of them have in common is the mic amps. And this gives me a much more versatile starting point. So the next thing I'm going to do is to demonstrate how to actually start work in a small system like this by identifying all of the components, making sure they all work, listening to all of the wedges, phase checking them, positioning them correctly, and setting up the whole EQ and patch thing. So that's the next thing we're going to do.